be talking about, really what have we learned from all these sediment sites that Clay talked about and other ones around the country. And so I'm going to go with the bottom line here, and is that these large sediment cleanup sites are really a trial and error attempt of trying to manage the ecosystem. We identify cleanup standards, we come up with a remedial design, we implement the design, and we try to see how effective it was. And the key information is not whether we met the remedy so much as what did we learn when we were trying to manage the ecosystem. And so from the sites that Clay was talking about in Puget Sound, there's a number of case studies. And if we look at some of these lessons learned from these case study sites, first of all, a successful sediment means you have to control the source. If you don't control the source, then the sediments are still going to be contaminated. When we're doing sediment cleanup, that's going to enable watershed restoration. It doesn't make sense to restore watershed if the sediments are so contaminated. On the other hand, it doesn't make sense to spend hundreds of millions of dollars cleaning up the sediment without also restoring some of the ecological function and habitat of these areas. And so revitalizing and restoring the watershed is also helping in our sediment remedy, because the sediments are going to be downstream of everything that happens in the watershed. And this is particularly important in the Puget Sound, where we have basically urbanization of the lowland natural areas being converted. Early actions will make a big difference. Some of these sites are very complicated, and it's very difficult to come up with the ultimate remedy. But it's pretty easy to identify really egregious problems and to take them out early and reduce those sources. Also, these sites are informed by data and adaptive management, and over time, our understanding of the processes and things that are happening is evolving. And did I mention source control? We have to control sources. Not only the legacy ones that we're trying to clean up, but also 21st century contaminants that could recontaminate areas that are already been cleaned up. So I just want to look at this risk assessment framework. This is the guidelines from the 90s of how to approach risk assessment at Superfund sites. And I'm replacing that with this diagram that Larry Kapustka put together, but it shows this iterative process going through problem formulation, analysis, and characterization, and then coming up with a risk management plan. And then I want to compare it to this adaptive management process. And this is more used in restoration projects and also in salmon recovery projects, particularly in the Puget Sound, where you have this plan, do, act, measure, learn. And so what we're doing when we're trying to manage the ecosystem, we start learning things. And so I like to think of trying to morph these two conceptual designs, where the iterative process of the Superfund risk assessment process is embedded in this plan, do, act cycle. And also the stakeholders, who I've shown here embedded in the central part of this framework, so that we understand, and our knowledge as we go forward, we can improve our knowledge and understanding and capture that learning, especially some of these sites that are going to take decades to work on. By the time new people are coming on and you don't want to start over each time, you need to have this information available. So look at a couple sites in Puget Sound. I live in Bremerton, Washington. Sinclair Inlet and the Puget Sound is the ancestral home of the Coast Salish people, including the Suquamish tribe, and is currently home to a diverse multicultural community. So the Navy has a shipyard here in Bremerton, Washington. So the Navy's mission is to protect the nation. And also that includes protecting the environment and also protecting the workers and the people that live here. So the Navy's operated in Sinclair Inlet since 1895, and I think this guy here was probably one of the first people to dispose of something in the inlet. And but it has a big challenge because you're talking about heavy industrial operations right on the water with no buffer between what's happening on the shipyard. And so during the 20th century and during the World War I, World War II, subsequent, a lot of contaminants were released into the surrounding waters. And so we have contaminants of concern contaminating the sediments, mostly with PCBs and mercury, but other things as well. And a remedial design was developed to go to the worst areas that were contaminated. And the Navy also needed to do dredging and navigational dredging to bring their ships in. And a confined aquatic disposal site was created. And so the heaviest, the most contaminated material was put in at the bottom of the confined site, covered with cleaner material, and then capped with clean sand. And then a monitoring program was put in place to measure the effectiveness, and there was a tighter grid around the shipyard and then a larger grid around the rest of Sinclair Inlet. In addition to that, the Navy spent around $70 million upgrading the infrastructure, controlling pollution abatement and controlling stormwater, hazardous waste handling, and a lot of things that have gone into that. And one of the keys to controlling these sources is implementing water pollution best management practices, or BMP. So the slide on the left shows operations in 1992, and you can see there's like stuff all over and not very effective handling of what's going on. And on the right side is 2013. Now the Navy has implemented all these best management practices. There's containment, everything's in the right place, and it's making a difference. And also monitoring what's going on. So this idea of continuous process improvement. And this is a way of changing the culture of how you do business. It's similar to the safety program, that it requires a change. And so it's being conducted to minimize the release of pollutants and protect the health of workers as well as the environment. So if we start looking at the data in Sinclair Inlet, these are from monitoring within the 500-foot area and then out in the inlet. And the sediment concentrations are coming down, similar to what Clay was talking about, at least for total PCBs, not so much for mercury. There hasn't been that much change. And then also monitoring the bottom fish, and this is the English sole. English sole are used because they have a high site fidelity, and so the concentrations have gone down, but we haven't been able to actually meet the cleanup goal for PCBs, and mercury has also been bouncing around a little bit. I also want to talk a little bit about the Lower Duwamish Waterway. Clay mentioned this in his talk. This is a very, a big site. Already $500 million have been spent, and there's still lots of things to be done. It's very complex. There's lots of moving parts, but as Clay also pointed out, they could identify some early actions that could be taken. This is an obvious problem. Let's take care of that. And you don't have to wait till we come up with the final solution. And so these are some of the areas in the Lower Duwamish where early actions have been taken. And then this is some data I borrowed from another presentation. But the PCBs and sediment have gone down, but not so much in the water and also in the English sole tissues. And it's kind of hampered by not having a robust monitoring program that's really going to tell what's going on. If we look in the wider problems of linking, like what Clay mentioned, is just very complex, and we often assume this very simple relationship, but we know it's more complex than that. We know We have a very complex food web that's associated with it. There's runoff from other sources, and there's also dredging, in-water work, prop wash. Sediments are moving around. And also, once contaminants get into the biota, they tend to be cycling in the biota, because there's how do they get out? Well, the animal dies, but then it's back in the detritus, and then it's back in the food web again. So when we look at some of the monitoring for Puget Sound, so this is Sinclair Inlet, Commencement Bay, which was one of the sites in Tacoma, compared to the Nisqually Reach, which is a reference site in southern Puget Sound that's relatively unimpacted. And this is the English soil concentrations in Sinclair Inlet and Commencement Bay. And you see all these peaks are pretty closely associated with spikes in the fish tissue coincide with sediment disruption, because we're stirring this up and it's getting available. Sometimes we can't avoid disturbing the sediment because we have to take corrective action. We have to maintain our harbors and ports to be able to use it. But we also have to understand that that has a risk of re-releasing the materials back into the environment. So that's why I think it's important to have this adaptive ability for risk assessment and management. And what makes that work is having data and having metrics that you can track and understand what's going on. And one of the programs that's doing that in Puget Sound, we have the Puget Sound Partnership, we have an adaptive management program, and we have a Puget Sound ecosystem monitoring program. Now, risk assessment isn't really currently incorporated in the partnerships framework, but a lot of these vital signs, they call these vital signs that they're monitoring what's going on in Puget Sound, are based on risk assessments and other ecological studies. And so, for example, sediment quality that we've been talking about is included here in this healthy water under toxic sin aquatic life. The seafloor is included in this area for functioning habitat, thriving species and food webs. We have human health is also being considered, as well as quality of life. So that's a really good program. So here are some of the main conclusions. Sediment remediation sites are these trial and error that can give us valuable insights. And I mentioned the lessons learned, and I can't emphasize enough source control, and also having this adaptive management framework within the program. I would also like to acknowledge contributions to this from the Sediment Management Work Group, including Clay Platmont and Betsy Henry from Anchor QAA, Jeff Stern from King County, Mark Mills, and also the Sediment Interest Group and my co-host Alan Jones, David Moore. Thank you so much. And if you're interested in any of these references, you can scan this QR code and you can download or have access to everything I've referenced in this report. I also want to put a plug in. I'll move back one for you, Charlie. I also want to put a plug in for the Sediment Matters poster session, which will be going on. And we have some great posters. Wendy Locks from King County is presenting her poster. Zachary Pandelius will be there, and Elizabeth Nichols, Laura Blackman, and Zachary. So you guys don't be sure to not miss those.